I know that it's only the second week of November. I know it's not even Remembrance Day yet. I know you might get upset with me if I say this, but I am already thinking about Christmas. But it's not because they've already decorated the malls and they're already playing Christmas music. I waited a long time for that. But I'm thinking ahead because I'm thinking about that whole story of the birth of Jesus. And I really want to focus on it this year. Last year, as you may recall, I focused exclusively on Luke's story of the birth of Jesus. This year, I want to give the other story of the birth of Jesus. It's the story in the Gospel of Matthew. I really want to focus on that. But I'm not ready to race ahead to the story about the birth in Bethlehem or the journey of the wise men or anything like that. What I would like to do, though, is I'd like to start this month where Matthew actually starts. I want to start with the genealogy, the family tree of Jesus that Matthew gives. Now, when I say that, there's probably two reactions. Some of you are saying, oh goody, I love family trees. I love nothing more than to trace my ancestors. And the rest of you are saying, what, are you kidding? Genealogy? Nothing puts me to sleep faster. Well, let me put your mind at ease. We're not going to be going through charts of the ancestry of Jesus or anything like that. All I want to do is to notice one very strange thing that Matthew does as he gives us the genealogy, the family tree of Jesus. You see, in the ancient world, genealogies were done in one way and only one way. In the ancient world, only male ancestors mattered. I'm not saying that it was right that women were not counted. It wasn't right, but that's how they did things. And so an ancient genealogy only included male ancestors. But Matthew, when he gives us this genealogy of Jesus, doesn't follow the rules. And as he does that, he actually names 5 women. 4 women from the Old Testament and Mary, the mother of Jesus. And since this was not normal, and since he goes out of his way to name just these 5 women, he can't have done it by accident. He must have had a reason. But what is that reason? Well, what we're going to try and do is understand what that reason might have been. Now, the story of these women are all told in the Bible. But they're not really what you'd call main characters. They're kind of side characters. And in many cases, their stories are not well known at all. And so what we're going to do over the next few weeks is we're going to look at the stories of these women. And as we understand them, hopefully come to understand why Matthew did what he did and mention these particular women in his genealogy. So we're going to start today with Tamar. And this is what Matthew says about Tamar. He says that Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah, twins, by Tamar. Sounds simple and straightforward enough, doesn't it? But we read the story from the book of Genesis this morning. And it turns out that the story is anything but simple and straightforward. In fact, you probably understand after reading it why the story isn't all that familiar, because the story is kind of unseemly, and it is rather explicit. And you can probably guess why it has not often been read in churches down through the years. Why we don't know the story very well. But it is a story in the Bible, and Matthew has drawn our attention to it, so we're going to focus on it a little bit. Now, what Matthew fails to mention as he says that Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar is the fact that when Judah fathered Perez and Zerah, he did not do so as Tamar's husband, but rather as her father-in-law. That's right, it is a story of incest and deception and prostitution. It's also a story that is very much tied up with the cultural practices of that time and place. You need to understand, first of all, what the traditional definition of marriage was in that world. In that world, marriage simply had one purpose. A man married a woman in that world for one thing, and that thing was sons. The purpose of a marriage in that world was to produce male heirs. A man could get whatever else he needed elsewhere, but only a wife could give him sons. And the problem with that was, if there was a marriage that did not produce sons, you had a serious problem. Now, of course, if the woman died before producing any sons, that wasn't a huge problem. She was easily replaced. But if the man died first, and there were still no sons, male heirs still needed to be produced. And so what would happen was that the dead husband's brother would then have to marry that woman and produce sons for her dead husband. And I know that seems really, really strange and twisted to us, but that's what they did. So anyways, Tamar found herself in exactly that position. She married this man named and then died. He died, we're told, because he was wicked, that God struck him down, but we're not told what made him so wicked. So then Tamar did what she was supposed to do, and she married Er's brother Onan. Well, Onan was wicked too. He was wicked, we are told, because he refused to produce heirs for his dead brother, and so God struck him down too. So now we have Tamar, twice a widow. And her father-in-law, Judah, steps into the story. Judah has one more son. But Judah's also saying to himself, hold on a minute, I have given this woman 2 sons, they're both dead, and he was superstitious. He didn't want to give the third son, and so he made excuses. He said, no, I'm sorry, my third son is too young, you're going to have to go home, and you're going to have to wait. But clearly, Judah had no intention of giving his third child to Tamar. And this put Tamar in an impossible situation. Because as a childless widow, if she couldn't marry, she was lost. Judah was not giving her the freedom to marry anyone else either, so she was in deep trouble. She was not permitted in that society to earn a living. She was not permitted to own or inherit property. And so you know what she was supposed to do? She was supposed to go home and die. That was the only option left to her. The only acceptable thing she could do was go home and die. Because Judah had taken away from her any means of support. But Tamar didn't do what she was supposed to do, did she? Tamar decided to take matters into her own hand, and Tamar, when she heard that her father-in-law was passing her way, well, she disguised herself. She set herself up as a prostitute. But a prostitute with a purpose. For she set out to seduce her father-in-law and to get pregnant by him. But she was also, I think of her kind of as a chess master, because she is thinking several moves ahead, and she plans ahead, and she makes sure that she gets from her father-in-law something that proves his identity. Basically, it's a great story, right? Because they make this contract. He's going to pay her 1 goat, but when it comes time to pay, he's all like, oh, sorry, I left my goat in my other pockets. And she said, okay, just give me something that proves who you are. So she takes these tokens of Judah's identity, and then later, when she is brought up on charges of prostitution and judged by her father-in-law of engaging in prostitution as a widow. And I know this guy is a great big fat hypocrite, but there you have it. She's able to produce these tokens and prove who the father of these children are. And that's Tamar's story. And if you didn't know that story, if you never heard it before, you probably say to yourself, what are you talking? That's in the Bible? What is a story like that doing in the Bible? But it is in the Bible. It's there. And we are a people who take the Bible seriously. And if we're going to take the Bible seriously, my friends, we have to take all of it seriously. We can't just pick and choose what we're going to read. We can't just choose the stories we like. We can't just take the lessons we want to learn. We have to take all of it. And what's more, Matthew has drawn our attention to this woman, to her story, by naming Tamar in the genealogy when he did not need to. I suspect that Matthew did that because he saw something in her story that taught him something about Jesus and who he was and why he came. And our job is to find out what that lesson was and absorb that lesson. So why on earth did Matthew mention Tamar? One idea that has been put forward many times down through the ages is that the reason why Matthew mentions her is because she is not a Jew, because she is a Gentile. This is not a coincidence because, of course, all of the women from the Old Testament that Matthew names in the genealogy happen to be Gentiles. And so the idea is that maybe Matthew mentioned these women because he was trying to make the point that Jesus, the Messiah, came not merely to save the Jewish nation, but also the people of all nations, and that these women are there to serve as a reminder of that. And that's true enough, I think. But I'm not sure that's the main reason why Matthew is doing this. Mostly because the fifth woman he mentions in the genealogy, Mary, the mother of Jesus, breaks the combination. She is a full-blooded Jew. So I think there's something else going on. There's another reason why, well, another thing that all of these women have in common. And that is the fact that there is a certain whiff of scandal about them. Now, we haven't looked at the other stories, the other women that Matthew mentions yet, and so you'll have to take my word for it. But all of them have scandals around what they did and what happened to them. And so maybe the idea is that Matthew mentions these women because he's trying to say that yes, scandalous things happen in this world, but that God is able to bring great things even out of morally questionable situations. That God's grace is that powerful that it can overcome our moral failures. This scandal theory kind of makes sense because, of course, we all know that when Matthew gets to Mary, the mother of Jesus, there will be a scandal there as well. There will be a scandal around the birth of Jesus and the paternity of Jesus. So Matthew does see this sort of idea of scandal running through it. So maybe he's mentioning these women because it just highlights the power of God's grace to overcome our failures, our moral failures. But I get that idea, but I don't think that's quite it. Because in a sense, that would mean that what Matthew is doing is it sort of makes him like a tabloid journalist. You know, he's going through and he's picking out all the celebrity gossip and saying, you know, oh, look at all of these salacious things that happened in Jesus' family tree. Just to get more readers, to get more attention. I think he's got to be doing more than that. And after all, look at Tamar's story. I mean, yes, it is gossipy enough, it is titillating enough to be found in the National Enquirer. But it's not just the story of moral failures, is it? In fact, the more I look at the story, the more I am convinced that the hero of this story is Tamar. She's the hero. Nobody else in the story acts like the hero. The men in the story are all abominable. Her husbands, and Onan, are both wicked. Her father-in-law freely and openly and publicly admits that he has done wrong by Tamar. He's not the hero. She must be the hero. And yes, she does something morally compromising. She does become a prostitute, but that was her only option. Women in her situation, widows without children, without sons, had no other option. They had no acceptable way to earn a living. And so that's what they did. They often turned to prostitution. You can't really fault her for that. And I don't think that Matthew faults her for that. But the thing about Tamar is that she doesn't just turn to prostitution to survive as other women did in her situation. She turns to prostitution, but she does so with a purpose. She becomes a prostitute with one client who is, by design, her father-in-law. She sets out to have a child by her father-in-law and thinks ahead, plans ahead to be able to prove the identity of the father. And by doing that, she does something really extraordinary, because she doesn't just save her own life by doing that. She saves her own life, but she also saves Judah's family. Judah's family was going to become extinct. There were no children in the next generation. They were going to die out. Tamar, by deceiving her father-in-law, by getting him to father her children, even though she had to deceive him to do so, saved that generation. She gave to Judah what he had been looking for all along, a grandchild. Because the twins that are born to her are Judah's grandchildren, because they are born to Judah's son, to Judah's son's wife. That's how it worked. So she saved the family from extinction. And that, I think, is what Matthew celebrates, that she, by her bravery, by her wisdom and forethought, saved the family of Judah from destruction. Matthew celebrates that because he knows where that family is going. He knows that Tamar's decision will lead directly to the Messiah. What Matthew is saying is that Tamar, by her creativity, by her wisdom, by her action to save her own life, brought the Messiah into the world. And yes, her story is messy, but you want to know what else is messy? Life is messy. Life is messy. Things in this world do not go according to plan. Things go wrong. People find themselves in impossible situations. And what Matthew is saying is that God uses people like Tamar who have messy situations, who fall into impossible situations. God uses them and their creativity and their wisdom and their initiative to bring about great things, like the Messiah. That's what Matthew is saying. And honestly, I think that is a good lesson for us to take to heart on a day like this. Today we will be celebrating the memory of many who have gone and served and sometimes died for this country. In war and in the military. And of all situations of life, war has got to be the messiest. I mean, good people go to war, and they go to war for the best of reasons, but what they run into is very messy and morally ambiguous, and it is very hard to get through, and they are often left wounded in physical ways, but in more than physical ways. We don't celebrate the war. We don't celebrate the death and destruction. We don't celebrate the messiness but we celebrate the people who go through it. We celebrate the people who go into it and do their best to hold on to their priorities and their principles and to do what is right under impossible circumstances. That's what we celebrate. We don't celebrate the death and destruction, but we do celebrate the people. Life is messy. But out of the worst of situations, God can use people to bring beautiful things. That's what the story of Tamar means to me. Story of a woman put in an impossible situation, who used what God gave her, who used her creativity, her wisdom, her initiative, her survival instinct to bring the Messiah into this world. And if God can use someone like Tamar to do something like that, what can God do with you and with me? As we, no matter what messiness we may have in our lives, as we put ourselves at God's disposal. Let's take a few moments now in silent reflection.